All right, we are recording. So welcome to week 3, everyone. As you can see on the slide, we are exploring curriculum in the early years. So this week, as you can see there on the slide, we'll be looking at definitions of curriculum, so ways and means of planning curriculum in early years learning environments, reflecting on and critiquing curriculum, so in terms of what that might look like for your assessment task, and also looking more in depth at belonging, being, and becoming. So I asked you to have a look at that reading, the same one that we looked at last week, but I wanted you to look at it specifically in terms of the tenets belonging, being, and becoming. So, and I also suggested that you have a look at a reading of your choice. I'm not, there's going to be readings there for you to look at. You don't have to do them if you don't want to. If you're busy reading for your assessment task and it's completely irrelevant, then by all means, read something else. But I think you will find in the first few weeks, most of the readings will be relevant to what you're doing. Okay. So in week 1, we looked at the early years learning framework, the definition of curriculum, and we noted that it uses the term framework and curriculum interchangeably. So it's important to remember that it will be, or it should be, different in every setting, every early years setting, based on the context and the needs of individual families. So it's very much about reflecting the diverse stories of each of the families. Every family is going to be different. Families are no longer mum, dad, and the 2 kids. They look very different now. Lots of blended families, families with 2 dads or 2 mums, or 1 dad, 1 mum, families where the grandparents might be the carers, or families where children are fostered or adopted. So lots and lots of different considerations that we need to to look at. So over the next few weeks, we will be discussing curriculum and pedagogical choices about practice. So all of those purposeful choices that are made by early childhood teachers and what influences these choices. So in our reading this week, it unpacks how curriculum comes into operation. So historical, political, economic, and social influences. And as we go through the workshop, I want you to interrupt me at any time if you have any insights that you would like to share. So these might be from the readings over the last few weeks, or possibly from your personal professional experiences in your specific context. So please interrupt at any time if you think of anything that you would like to share. All of your stories make it so much more interesting for us rather than just hearing my voice. Okay, so as we outlined last week, fundamental to the National Quality Framework under Quality Area 1 sits the early years learning framework, so our curriculum framework. So different cultures, contexts, and also values of families and communities contribute to the richness of each of the child's learning experiences. And they really do inform how we plan curriculum. It's also important to reflect on, to remember that no single curriculum document actually captures all there is to being a teacher. So curriculum is just one facet. So looking at the requirements of the National Quality Standards, Quality Area 1 It requires educators and coordinators to take a planned and a reflective approach to their decisions around curriculum. So it's essential, therefore, that the content is considered alongside a shared philosophy of teaching. So I guess also theoretical frameworks of teaching and learning, and of course, ethics and values as well, which will play a very important part here. So a skilled educator needs to have an extremely good knowledge of and understanding of the curriculum, and to use it in the context of the child and the child's family. So we're all aware of that. But what we do need to consider is that the child should shape the curriculum, not vice versa. I'll give you a bit of time to read through those factors on the slide that are a big influence on curriculum. And if you're looking specifically for research around this, the being an early childhood educator, bringing theory and practice together is a really good one. So the McArdle, Gibson and Zolo one that's on QUT Readings, that would be a really good one to use in terms of that reflecting on the child shaping the curriculum. That's something that you really want to look into for your assessment task. So questions around assessment and planning. It's a big question when it comes to curriculum frameworks. So formative assessment is really seen to be useful and an important practice in early childhood learning environments. And we're all aware of that, but what does assessment and planning look like? So among theorized benefits of formative assessment, we include building strong foundations for future learning and enabling the early detection of developmental delays. So assessment is a really important part of planning. So early childhood settings, as most of you will be aware, they use an ongoing cycle of observation, analysis of learning, documentation, planning, implementation, and critical reflection and evaluation. So they utilize meaningful information that they've collected about children's current knowledge, their identity and culture, and they use this to assess their learning and progress. So also to communicate and collaborate this to parents about children's learning outcomes, and very importantly, to support and to inform that transition to school. So we went on the Blackboard this week. I asked you to look into this cycle in a bit more depth as part of the preparation activities. And I wanted you to analyze the language and the structure of the planning cycle and consider how these approaches might fit in with your own experiences of curriculum planning. Because I know quite a few of you are interested in assessment in early childhood context. So what did we come up with? When you looked at the dot points on the infographic, did they relate to your own context or current understandings? Is this sort of what you would consider in your early years context? Would anyone like to share? No? Nothing in the chat?
I'm happy to speak, Angela. When I was going through, I'm not an early childhood educator, I'm primary trained and I work in learning support. But as I was reading this, I was expecting it to be unfamiliar, expecting it to be all about early childhood education. And I can relate a lot more than I was expecting to this document, because I think it's what all teachers do, regardless of the sector they work in.
Yes, definitely, definitely. But I guess it's how we look at it in terms of, it is formative assessment, isn't it? We are looking at observations and reflections and trying to get that picture of the whole child. That cycle, it's about planning for further learning. And it's also very much about, and this is what is very important to my personal beliefs as well, it supports children as capable and competent people. So children having agency, and I guess in a lot of ways, giving them the ability and the opportunity to make choices and their own decisions about what they're learning. I think that's a very important part of early childhood teaching and learning. And, as we can see, reflecting and evaluating on children's learning and development in a collaborative way with colleagues and with families is vital. So that's part of affirming and affirming practices, but also challenging them as well. Cameron has said very similar to the inquiry cycle used in EQ schools. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So those of you that are focusing on assessment for learning and how making those connections to curriculum for your assessment task, the planning cycle will be a really important factor, something that you would need to unpack. Anything else that anyone wanted to share in regards to their experiences in the use of the assessment and planning cycle?
Hi, Angela. It's Warren.
Hi, Warren.
Hi. Yeah, we use this pretty much. This is what we've been told to use from our head office and our uppers, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So they pull it directly from the NQS and they drill it at every meeting. Because they believe as long as we stay with the regulations and the standards, we can't stray too far.
Mm-hmm.
So we just try and, in my position, I've tried to break it down to the simplest form so that our educators are able to track the learning of children. And I've used this planning cycle and its headings, or sorry, the subsections, they're observe, analyze, etc. So that the educators know what to look at and then can track and say, yes, they've documented this child, etc., etc. So it is extremely relevant, almost an everyday occurrence in my position.
Oh, definitely. It really is building that understanding of individual children and understandings of the whole child as capable and competent, and finding those opportunities to give them agency. So I guess in terms of an early childhood focus on this, as opposed to an early primary or even upper primary.
Excellent. The issue, though, that I've noticed, and I'm just going through current reflections now, is that unfortunately the industry doesn't allow much time for educators to sit down and actually properly document through this. So a lot of it is pretty much either very minimal or fabricated, which is an issue, which is part of an assessment I want to look at in this for my first assessment. So even though the theory fits, but in practice and business expectations, very rare it actually hits the mark where it should be.
Mm-hmm. I actually went to visit an early learning centre a couple of days ago, and I was just blown away. Each of the educators had, dedicated planning time well above what, is a legislative requirement. But there was a real focus on that community of practice, and it was the culture was all about the assessment and planning cycle. So it was just what you did every day, and processes were put in place to make it easy. And it did include, you know, allocated planning time, and not just for the ECT teachers and the group leaders, but, you know, the assistant teachers as well were brought in and encouraged to, you know, to participate as well. And interestingly, I'm referring to a privately owned centre. This isn't a community-based centre. It isn't an independent centre. This is a privately for-profit early years centre, you know, with a birth to 2, so a nursery right up to kindergarten. So it does happen.
Oh, it happens. I agree. It happens.
But it's very difficult to find the time. And I think it's about everyone working together rather than independently. And this goes for early primary as well, to try and make sure that time is allocated, and to put this planning and assessing and documenting front and center. So it's a really important part of our practice.
So you're talking about, like, as you had a previous slide, was professional collaboration, which is, again, it's that issue of time, and of course budgets come into it, because you got to, of course, cover people on the floor, etc.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's actually nice to hear that you came across a privately owned one and actually put some money towards that. Unfortunately, a lot of companies follow the standard status quo business model, which don't do that.
This service actually got an exceeding rating.
Yeah, see, exactly. Yeah.
I see. Helen, did you want to share?
I'm going to try my microphone. Has that worked?
Yes.
Lovely. Thank you. Hello, Angela. Hello, everyone. Yeah, look, I just thought I'd like to mention as well, I think when children are first coming from preschool or childcare, transitioning into primary school or infants area, I think it's a very strong focus at that point in time. I myself was a kindergarten teacher for a few years, and those initial stages of assessing where the children are at are so critical at that point, because that will actually influence and determine how you are going to teach the children. And so without that assessment, you could be, you know, wasting time that, you know, could be better spent on things that the children need to learn or need to be introduced to in their foundation years. So it is very critical when they're transitioning over to kindy. I think, and obviously, you know, in primary school, it is different, because we have running records to determine their comprehensive understanding and all the literacy features that they need to develop. But yeah, look, it is so critical, you know, especially in those early years, that assessment is constant. And without that's where children are falling behind and falling through the cracks. So
well, in prior to school settings, the majority of, well, the legislative requirement, and also the majority of ECTs are very committed to observing and collecting information. So detailed observations and running records, checklists where it's appropriate. I'm not completely into checklists, but for some situations, if you are looking for a specific area of development, they can be really important. And it's also, you know, working with parents, working with professionals as well. There may be you know, language consultants or, you know, all sorts of professionals that that early childhood teachers may need to work with and implement particular interventions with specific children in their learning environments as well. So there's a lot to consider. Thanks, Helen.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so as educators, we reflect daily on the way we do things, on why we do them, and I guess, are these reflections or these decisions in the best interest of the children, of families and colleagues? So, and it's part of the Australian professional standards as well, like evaluating on all of our practices across those, the 3 areas of the standards. So the deliberate selection of resources as well, where and how they might be placed in the environment, and of course the timeframes for their use, and reflection on whether or not the decisions reflect the children and the family's life stories. It's very important. And again, it gets back, we're talking about, you know, what the families look like in your service, and making sure all families are represented, all genders are represented, cultures are represented, so children feel like they're a part of that context, that they can see themselves, their lives reflected in the service. So all of these curriculum decisions that we make on a daily basis, and also the behaviours that we use, the language that we use, it sets the tone and the substance of what happens in the learning environment. And that tone and substance, it's important. And yes, it's basic, and it's a cooperative society model, most definitely. Yeah. So it's about representing the children and the students and the families who we're interacting with on a daily basis. And as teachers, we have the power to do that. It's up to us. All the decisions that we make them for a reason. They need to be purposeful. So our decisions around the approaches that we use and the content that we teach, they're influenced by many environmental factors that you can see on the slide. And they're also influenced by teacher interests and expertise as well. So if we have a particular area of interest or expertise, then we're going to focus on that. If STEM is something that you are particularly interested in and capable in, then you're going to be using that a lot in the environment. And the same goes for creativity. If you're a creative person, or if you're a musical person, if you play a musical instrument, then that's going to be a big part of your day-to-day planning and curriculum. And again, this gives a teacher power. These decisions, we have the power to design exactly what's going to happen. So we're going to look at this in more depth when we explore pedagogy and theoretical experiences, influences a little further down the track. So meaning making. We talked about a sociocultural approach last week. So recognizing that learning does not simply reside in the individual. Of course, it's located in the social world that children live in. So this knowledge as a social construction, as many of you would be aware, comes from the writings of Lev Vygotsky. So his seminal research. So rather than children learning and teachers imparting knowledge, teachers and children learn together in early childhood settings. So they make sense of ideas and meaning making together. So an integral part of the process of co-construction is engaging in dialogue. So getting down to the children's level and really talking to them. So I guess the questions that we ask and what we introduce into the environment, this questioning, the awe and the wonder that enables theory making and critical reflection it's typical of childhood. Would you agree? No, that awe and wonder and questioning and investigating. It's something that childhood is all about. But unfortunately, somehow as we get older, as children possibly transfer into more structured learning environments, we lose that. As children grow up, they, without that inquiry, without that interaction and the open-ended questioning, that awe and wonder tends to be lost. And there are many reasons for that. We all know about overcrowded curriculums and having strict guidelines to follow in terms of curriculum. Pamela says, that's why I love walking trails with my own children. Yeah, so, bush kindy, beach kindy, all of these sorts of things are becoming very popular now because it's encouraging children to get out into nature, to wonder, to be inspired by what they see. Warren?
Yeah, I agree with you that children, when they're young, they find awe in almost anything. Of course, their interest spectrum is huge, right? And as we get older, of course, it gets more and more narrow. We find our own interests. But I still believe that even at this age, if it's something is interesting to me and there's a provocation of some sort, I'll follow through on that, going, oh, wow, this is something new to learn. And as I believe as well, as long as teachers or mentors, whatever the case is, provide that provocation of interest, you can continue that line of inquiry until your deathbed, really.
Yeah. It's developing a love of learning, isn't it?
Yes,
love
that's
of inquiry.
Yeah. Yeah. So the terminology that's thrown around a lot is lifelong learners, but I'm not sure that most educators that I've worked with, especially in early childhood, know how to really develop that.
Yeah, it is. It's well, I think part of it is using that inquiry-based learning. We're going to talk about emergent curriculum soon, but it's also about the way we actually interact with children as well. Our excitement, it's contagious, isn't it? If we're excited about something, then the children are going to follow suit. So Maladuzzi in the 100 Languages of Children emphasizes that pedagogy should not be a prisoner of too much certainty. I love that. Pedagogy should not be a prisoner of too much certainty. So instead, educators, they need to be aware of both the relativity of pedagogy's power and the difficulties translating its ideals into practice. So Maladuzzi's 100 Languages of Children, it's something we're going to be talking about further down the track. We're going to be breaking down the Reggio focus in quite a lot of depth, actually. So again, it's an area that when I emailed everyone, there were quite a few people that were interested in finding out in more depth exactly what the pedagogies behind Maladuzzi and the Reggio. Eunice says, we are looking at ways to ask questions, meaningful questions, and questions that are purposeful. Definitely, yeah. So I think it was Piaget who warned us that the errors and ills of pedagogy come from the lack of balance between scientific data and social application. So yes, a lot to think about. So in order to understand curriculum and to utilize it in all of our incredibly unique learning environments, we need to understand the components of curriculum design, so rationales and outcomes. And we kind of looked at that a little bit in terms of the development of the early years framework last week and the policies and the research behind that. But curriculum frameworks such as the early years framework have been very similarly developed in other countries, which again we talked about in New Zealand and United Kingdom, Finland, Norway and Sweden. They're areas, and in Italy as well, areas that a lot of research and a lot of thought has been put into those curriculum frameworks. And similar to the early years learning framework, these curriculum documents, they are seen as guides with the educator central. So as a reader, a critique, and an enactor. So this is something that all of those frameworks have in common. Critiquing the early years learning framework. This is something that I asked you to have a go at in the pre-workshop activities. So it involves understanding, questioning, and critically examining all of the aspects of the curriculum. So on the slide are some specific questions I asked you to consider when unpacking the framework. I've taken some away, and they're the ones that we're going to specifically look at in this session. I'm not going to look at all of them. That's something that you're going to have to do in your assessment task. So these questions are going to be really helpful when you're comparing and contrasting documents in your essay. And especially for those of you like might be looking at curriculum frameworks across states or possibly across countries as well, which quite a few of our international students will be doing. So from our discussions over the last weeks, especially week 1, you would have had a good understanding of why the framework was written. So the research and subsequent policy that many reforms were based on. Then we also have what it values. Anyone have an idea of the what you think the early years learning framework might value? So I guess we're talking about the 8 principles here. So for those of you that have started to unpack it and have a good look. Any thoughts when you were responding to these questions in the pre-workshop activities?
In the article about the belonging being becoming, it was talking about the, oh sorry, I've lost my train of thought now.
That's all right.
You were saying about?
So we're looking at, you know, the values, what is valued in the
yes, thank you. So where it was saying about children having choices and how that important that was, but then it was saying it was politically unpalatable for children to be seen as their own identity who could make decisions and things. And I thought that was interesting. Like, were they considering that there'd be some sort of child uprising or something? You know? Because it was almost as if that was a threatening thing to them, that children could have a choice, or unless they were thinking that that would then not carry through to school, because you don't get that much of a choice when you get to school.
Yeah.
As to why that was such a concern and politically unpalatable.
Not having a choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
well,
yeah.
I think there is that, you know, if we do want to give children agency and we, you know, we want to be responsive to children, I think choice is incredibly important. But how much choice do children actually have? Teachers are the ones that, you know, early childhood teachers, no matter what you do, they're the ones that are going to initiate something, aren't they? You know,
yes, they're the ones that make the decision about what aspect of this particular investigation we're going to follow up on, because I'm the one that knows what resources are in the cupboard.
Exactly.
And I'm the one that knows what I can, where I can take it.
So
that may not be where you intended it to be as this child.
Yeah, exactly. And each child may have a completely different intention of where this goes. And we're going to talk about that a little bit further. But We've got here, it is a curriculum that is hopefully transformative. Yeah. Sharon said that a few points I highlighted were the importance of family connection with the education environment. Play is important and valuable. It's not just an add-on. Yeah, that's great. And so Pamela says it could be as simple as valuing the important role of early childhood settings. I like that, very important. So intentional teaching, I think, is a really big part of the early years learning framework. So intentional teaching going hand in hand with play-based learning. So being purposeful in the strategies that you use, the approaches that you use. And again, we're going to go through that in more, we're going to break that down more. Valuing the cultural and social context, that is vital. It's something that runs all the way through the early years learning framework. And I guess providing for continuity in experiences and enabling children to have that successful transition to school. So this is where it's contextual. A lot of kindergartens and early years contexts have a connection to a primary school or the catchment school. So it's important that they work in together. Jade says values diversity and equity. Fantastic. Yeah, yeah, very, very important. It's interesting. I guess diversity, I had this conversation with, I went on a writing retreat with some of the people that I'm doing research thing, and we were talking about what teachers think diversity is, because it's cultural diversity, gender diversity. It's, teachers have such an influence in terms of how children perceive diversity. It's quite exciting. We'll go off. I'm going off in another direction. So Warren says, I still have my reservations about play-based learning and the definition of play. The early years learning framework do define play-based, but it's still ambiguous. Yeah, I guess it's ambiguous in that it's a guide, and the extent to which or the way play-based learning approaches are used in individual environments, Warren, because every environment, I think.
Yeah, but what my reservation really comes, what my reservation comes from is really that a lot of educators and leaders and of that sort fall back on saying it has to be play-based, but they don't actually put a definition on it, and then you have a very loose structured lesson, so to speak. So yeah, play to me has been different. I've tried to run definitions through it. I've done digital play to actual sandbox play, as we call it, and whatever it is. But the play is different to every other person out there. But as soon as a company falls back on, it's play-based, and they just think it's free play, but it shouldn't be. There's always a play with purpose, almost.
Yeah, I think the majority of, well, definitely experienced and qualified early childhood teachers have a pretty good understanding that play-based learning isn't just free time. It has to go hand in hand with an inquiry-based learning.
Yes.
Yeah. And
yes.
also those using those intentional teaching practices. So, and it's, as I said before, it's about the dialogue. It's about how you talk, how you interact with children, or how you choose not to talk and interact with children, letting them work it out for themselves. Silence is sometimes an important decision to make. Helen has got a really lovely sharing about diversity here. I think its value is to offer educators the many viewpoints that need to be considered when educating young children, incorporating play in their planning and accommodating diversity of children with special needs, language barriers, or even physical disabilities. Lovely. That's great, Helen. Yifang says children should also have the right to evaluate. Nice. From the children's point of view, may make this evaluation more complete rather than just following the adult's perspective. Nice. I like that. So evaluating their learning, evaluating, I guess, the resources as well to a certain extent. Yeah. Warren says he's seen some examples of this. I read out the chat because I realize that those that are watching the recording can't see it. So Kamiko says play is hands-on activity, unstructured learning, perhaps followed by structured learning. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I think, you know, in terms of critiquing frameworks, we also need to consider those underlying belief systems, the images, perceptions, ideals, assumptions, both visible and invisible as well. So all of those, I guess, intrinsic concepts that are informally and often unintentionally transmitted in our learning environments. So we call it the hidden curriculum. So all of those things that are unseen, all of those decisions that we make, snap decisions that we make based on our beliefs and our values, or based on our likes and dislikes. And it's also about based on history as well. So choices that we make to include or not include things in the curriculum. That hidden curriculum is something that we need to consider. So we've got from the article, attempting to challenge one of the most enduring myths of childhood, that of the innocent child, proved highly sensitive and political. I found it interesting that play is so politically charged. It is, isn't it? It's no longer just something that's accepted as part of childhood. We need to question it and poke it and yeah. Play-based learning, a context for learning through which children organise and make sense of their social worlds as they engage actively with people, objects and representations. So that's, Warren's got that from the early years learning framework. Play-based learning, a context for learning through which children organise and make sense of their social worlds as they engage actively with people, objects and representations. So do you have a problem with that definition, Warren?
I don't have a problem with it, but it's very, to me, it's very ambiguous, open to interpretation, of course. And as you say, each curriculum, each child, each family will be represented differently. That's why I have the very I don't know, standard fallback of play definition is where I have a problem with. Each child is different and they play differently. As it says, there's social worlds. Each child has a different social world, and how they interact with that is different way of play. This is why that open-ended, just free play, which a lot of educators sometimes fall back on, then they can just say, oh, that's play. But to me, it's not. That's loose parts play, whatever. But it's not actually falling in the definition of ELF of play, because there's no structure and organization.
I guess if we think about making purposeful and thoughtful decisions, free play, I guess that would be a decision that you make. But is there such a thing as free play in an environment that is based on thoughtful and purposeful decisions?
Yeah, no, I'm all for free play. By all means, go out there and go crazy, run around, do things. But as soon as you put it into an educational context, then you start, as you said, start to poke and prod play and dissect it and observe it and what have you. So it's in the education realm and early childhood education. This is where it starts. We can basically pull it apart forever and redefine it.
Yeah, Pamela says that she knows that some early years classrooms refer to it as active play.
Element play area. You see, so many definitions coming up.
Yeah, and Sharon says the trouble with play is the rules often get in the way. Yeah. Angela says developmental play, child initiated play from Eunice. So lots and lots of different thoughts there. Play is on a continuum. Who has control of the rules? Free play in schools equals kids choose what they want to do. Yeah. But still, I guess children aren't choosing what they want to do if the adults or the teachers have provided the resources. So if the resources are there, then that controls what the children play with and how the investigation or whatever they're doing unfolds. So, okay, let's move on. All right. So, in terms of the purpose of the early years learning framework, so on the slide are the 4 main aims you could unpack and compare and contrast with other curriculum documents relevant to your specific focus. So we're looking at aims like to inspire conversations. That's an important one. It's a good one too. To hold high expectations for young children's learning. So seeing them as competent and giving them agency. To communicate a common understanding and language through the 5 learning outcomes. Again, that's important. So I guess having an understanding within your setting, for example, of what play means. So if everyone in the setting that is interacting, is there continuity in the use of those understandings? That's a really important one. And to provide a national broad direction for early childhood educators. So again, like the introduction of the Australian professional standards, having a common language and a direction. So yeah, but remembering it's quite a loose one, and it can be interpreted differently according to different contexts. Can and will be. So one of the important implications for the framework is involving children in their learning. So through encouraging them to follow emerging interests. This is a very big part of the early years learning framework, making sure that their intentions are clearly understood and embraced. So that involves active listening. It involves active and open-ended questioning. So with opportunities for children to reflect on their play and learning with an adult and each other. And I guess very importantly, as part of this is allowing choice in how they respond to ideas, to objects, resources, to questions introduced by their teacher. So always remembering that what we choose to teach confers or denies power in our environment. We have the power to really direct everything that happens in those environments. It's something that we always need to consider. So to facilitate children having control of their learning, so I guess to have some power, teachers need to be flexible. They need to be adaptable, and again, they need to use a range of teaching and learning approaches. So they need to see children as capable and competent, and they need to be active listeners and communicators with that ability to form strong partnerships with families. That's a really big focus in early years education, because without those partnerships, if we see parents as parents and carers as being those that know their children better than anyone, which they do, we really need to develop those partnerships. And that's a really big factor in terms of our role in curriculum decisions. So when you're making decisions about curriculum, we need to consider who has the power in decision making. So part of the curriculum decision making is the consideration of these questions on the slide. And I popped these here because in terms of your assessment task and unpacking not just the early years learning framework, but other, things like age appropriate pedagogies and things like that, I really want you to think about those questions on the slide. Without questioning this, we're not really thinking critically about those decisions that we're making. I'll give you a moment to read through. Any thoughts? I guess one of the things for me, the important points and considerations is who gets to see themselves in the curriculum. Is it all of the children in the environment, all of the families, all of the cultures? We talk about even something as simple as resources. Like I think I can't remember where I came across it. I think it was, may have even been one of my children. We were reflecting on Lego. We're a big Lego family. And we have a friend who has cerebral palsy, and she doesn't have a lot of movement, and she's spends most of her time in a wheelchair. And we were going to buy a Lego set for her. She was interested in Lego, and one of my children actually made the comment of, there's no Lego people in wheelchairs. And I thought about that, and the context of an early learning setting, how are children with diverse abilities represented in the resources that we use? We have different colored dolls and things like that are a requirement of registration, a regulatory requirement, but how do we represent others? We've got here, is it possible to oversaturate and become overwhelmed by trying to include all voices? Yeah, that, we're not going to be able to include all voices, but I think it's something that we need to consider in terms of the voices of those young people in our environments. Who is advantaged or disadvantaged when we work certain ways? Yeah, so one pedagogical approach may work for one child and not for another. It's a good point. So we have a set of diversity dolls. Yeah. So what do the diversity dolls look like, Warren?
They are basically like a 6-inch figure. They don't have any articulation. They're the stiff type dolls, but they range from, there's a person in a wheelchair, there's a person with crutches and leg braces, there's a person with I believe an artificial arm, of course every race and color under the sun that you could think of. Yeah, so all of these dolls are out there, and the kids get to play with them. Of course, they free access. So yeah, they have that ability to play with the diversity type dolls.
Yeah, that's good. That's excellent. I think, but part of being, critically reflective and thinking about our decision making and thinking about, our environments is, to really evaluate exactly what sort of resources we're using. So, you even think about, when you buy those sets of the animals, you get lions and tigers, all different animals. You get mum, dad, and one kid, don't you? The male, the female, and a baby. So, you know, that doesn't represent every family. So I guess they're the sort of things that we need to think about or discuss with the children as well. Be open and choose to discuss that with the children, that, you know, how, you know, representations of families, those sorts of things. Kamiko says, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. George Orwell. We listen to alphabet rhymes in different languages, especially the ones represented in the classroom. Excellent, excellent. The values should definitely be very much influenced by the values of the particular school or centre. Yeah, very much so. Excellent. Some really good observations there. Excellent. Well done.
Angela, I was just going to add, you're saying about Lego and your friend who has cerebral palsy. That made me think, I wasn't thinking so much about reflecting diversity in terms of having the wheelchair as part of the Lego set, but how easy or difficult is Lego to pull apart when you have low control over your hands and low muscle tone, etc., that you don't have that strength. I know they're good to build up the strength, but then you think, well, then how accessible is that equipment that I've got?
Oh, definitely.
So who am I excluding?
Yeah.
Just because they just find it too difficult.
Yeah.
I'd love to do it. So, you know, do I roughen up the edges so that it's easier for them to get purchase on it and be able to pull it apart, or those sorts of things as part of your reflection?
Yeah. Well, she couldn't manipulate the Lego, but she loved having the Lego. And, you know, I guess her brothers worked with her a lot creating, and she would they used to tell stories. She would tell a story and they would create a Lego world. And, you know, she was very much into fantasy, and she's grown up now. She just turned 17 actually, and she's a magnificent writer. She's brilliant. And so she's into fantasy and manipulation.
For all the other children of like, what do they not access? Like what toys are they, or experiences are they avoiding because they just find it too difficult? Like water play, some children who don't like the sensory thing of being cold or warm, or, you know, they just don't like it, or messy paint, etc. So what am I including or not in, you know, that then excludes them? How can I change it? I think that's something important to include as part of people's evaluation.
Oh, definitely. A really good point. But I think it's all about knowing our students really well, having good observations and that communication with parents to understand how they are diverse, not just in the way they look or the way they act, but what they like, their likes and dislikes as well. Kamiko was saying that there was an autistic student who loves Lego at kindy. He wanted to build Lego vertically on the wall, not horizontally on the floor. Brilliant. That's great. Yeah. Agency is central to the early years learning framework and assumes that all families value agency and independence, when some cultures do not hold this as high as other cultures. Very, very good point, Tiffany. An extremely good point. So, so there may be some contexts or settings that maybe aren't quite as, don't hold those values that the early years learning framework hold. Is that what you're saying, Tiffany?
Yeah, I think like we talk about, like the EYLF really talks about diversity and, you know, accepting everybody. But then when it comes to how families rear their children, a lot of educators and, you know, growing up in Australia, they will fall back to, you know, independence being highly central to being a child and developing that independence and autonomy. And for some cultures, the caring part is around feeding the child or holding the child all of the time, or, you know, acting differently to maybe how maybe Western culture might value child rearing practices. So I guess just that I think that the EYLF does assume that it assumes that we all hold similar values.
I don't know about that.
Ways.
I think in some ways it actually encourages you to be accepting of parenting. I think that there is something in there that says to be accepting of parents' decision making and the values of families.
Yeah, I agree, but I also think people still sort of go, oh, but like a lot of educators will still fall back to kind of thinking, oh, they're not being fair to the child, or the child needs to learn this and he should be doing this, or she should be doing this by this age. And they project their values and their culture onto other families. The EYLF probably does kind of encourage us to certainly be accepting of diversity, but in terms of how it looks in practice, I'm not sure how willing people, like there's sort of that unconscious bias that people have.
Definitely. I think a really good example of that is the use of amber necklaces. Has anyone come across that?
Yes.
Yeah. And sleep as well. Like, you know, the way parents want their children to sleep, like in birth to 2. And, you know, is that concurrent with, you know, child safe practices and things like that. So there is, you know, it's that communication with parents and coming to some sort of agreement about things as well. It's you know, it's where being a really good communicator and mediator comes in as well. It's all part of being an early childhood teacher, isn't it? Warren says, at what point do we intervene in regards to accepted culture? Yeah, which is what we're talking about there. And Tiffany says that I had a family that felt that their child was growing up too fast. Yeah. Responding to Warren, you are right. There is also the issue of changing a culture and how we know we shouldn't, but some behaviours don't fit in with our westernized culture, which for right or wrong is dominant. Yeah. I'm recalling a male student who urinated whenever he wanted and another who refused to open his food as that was women's work. Yeah. Interesting. Wow. I think that's also when the love of lifelong learning, meaning that parents read widely and really think critically about issues. So it's so important. I guess it's also part of educating parents and giving parents an understanding of different cultural aspects and I guess what is acceptable and not acceptable, I think, in terms of culture. And Kamiko, beautiful, it comes back to belonging. Thank you. That's wonderful. Belonging does not require us to change who we are, not fitting in. Good. All right, so educators view culture and the context of a family as central to children's sense of being and belonging and to success in lifelong learning. Educators also seek to promote children's cultural competence. Lovely. Very nice. Okay, my goodness. I better move on. It's going to be a very long session tonight. So much wonderful discussion. Well done, guys. Now, I really wanted to, I know that a lot of you will be completely understanding of what emergent curriculum is, but I just wanted to have a chat about it. Especially we've had lots of discussion about it in the internal workshop as well. A lot of our international students were interested in it. So it's rooted in the work of early childhood theorists like Dewey and Piaget and Vygotsky. So an emergent curriculum, it's constantly evolving in response to children's changing needs and interests. It's also about parent involvement and community involvement as well. And I guess factors come into it like teachers' priorities such as curriculum frameworks. So the term emergent curriculum, it's used to describe a play-based curriculum. So an inquiry, or I guess we would call it a project-focused approach. So very much inquiry-based. So I guess we would be talking about critical theory here. It's when pedagogical choices are made where children are deeply engaged in a variety of different activities and projects. So, you could have 10 different things happening in the learning environment at one time, all different children being involved in different things. So it's socially constructed, and it should, if it's working properly, have a very high level of family and also community input as well. So emergent curriculum identifies the need to include child-led learning coupled with educator-supported learning opportunities. So it's viewed, I guess, as a child-initiated and educator-framed process. So negotiated and co-constructed. So I guess children have a voice, but if we're talking about in terms of power, teachers also have power there as well. So it's viewed, I guess, it can initially come from a range of sources, as you can see up there on the slide. And it's, you know, it really values that community and cultural groups as well. So there needs to be a lot of emphasis on what's happening within the community. Any thoughts on this? Anyone had much experience using an emergent curriculum, so an inquiry or project focus? Yeah. Still a bit of chat going on about our previous focus. Sorry, we just needed to move on. Anyone experienced in emergent curriculum? No?
It's Natalie here.
Yeah.
I don't know if this counts, but when I was teaching early childhood within a school context, we did the Kathy Walker investigations. Does that come under the emergent curriculum?
Yeah, so inquiry based. Yeah, very much inquiry based curriculum. Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
In the early years of school, I know there's quite a strong explicit teacher directed instruction for English and maths, but then for STEM subjects, they're turning to a lot more inquiry based approaches as well.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. They still can use inquiry based approaches in maths and especially in English as well, and literacy. But yeah, it takes a lot of work and a lot of thought and creativity. That's, I guess, the problem, and sort of moving away from, you know, it takes time. Project-based experiences take a lot of time, as you would know, Angela. So who do you think has the power here in decision making in the use of an emergent curriculum? Any thoughts? I guess the teachers, early childhood teachers, I guess, are the stage directors, with curriculum being the teacher's responsibility, not the children. So we do have to, you know, cover curriculum areas to some extent. But I guess a lot of people who hear the words emergent curriculum may wrongly assume that everything emerges from the children. But really, teachers are very much involved in making critical decisions about what direction the learning takes place. So what's worth learning about and what's not, and the values, I guess, that are apparent in teacher attitudes, and I guess the language choices that they make. So I guess my point is, no matter what we do, there is some emphasis on teacher decision making. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes it can go really wrong as well. Like I was watching one of the clips the other day and it talked about how the teacher had observed the children being interested in the butterflies. So she went the whole hungry caterpillar, you know, down that road and talking about caterpillars emerging, and she wondered why the children didn't take it on, like they weren't really that interested. And it wasn't until she observed them for a much longer period that she realized it wasn't the butterfly itself and it wasn't the life cycle that they were interested in the way it flew and what things fly.
Yeah.
And actually their idea emerged more into paper plane making and how far things could fly and what things were heavy and what were light. And yeah, so sometimes if you kind of take over the idea, or you think you know, then you might not capture what you think is an emergent curriculum if you're not really sort of tuned into what the children are really interested in.
Definitely, yeah, really good point. So it's all about that active listening and observation, isn't it?
Yeah.
To step back and I guess to a certain extent, to observe and see what the students and children are doing. And I guess that's what emergent curriculum is about, in terms of letting it unfold, not interrupting, letting it take its own course. So there's quite a bit of chat that I'm going to read out. Could emergent curriculum influence a smooth transition between prior to school and school context? Most definitely. I think emergent curriculum is seen more as an inquiry-based approach in terms of early primary. We're going to watch a really good clip in week 4 next week about an inquiry-based project that I just think blew me away. So yeah, definitely. And it really, that emergent curriculum and inquiry based in going between prior to school and school context will really assist with that, the transition with approaches. I guess it's still allowing them to make their own decisions and to have a voice in a lot of ways. I will go through in a couple of weeks when we talk about pedagogy. I'm actually going to share a particular emergent curriculum experience that one of my students did during placement. I think the teacher has the final power. They have so much to adhere to that in reality, true child-led curriculum can't exist in the way we would perhaps like to, because it has to be molded, it has to be resourced, and it has to be responded to. Beautiful, Sharon. Very good. It has to be molded, it has to be resourced, and it has to be responded to. Well done. Helps foster their enthusiasm for lifelong learning. Beautiful, Jessica. I think the teacher always has the power to direct the students into emergent learning. Sowing the seed analogy, looking for learning opportunities. Yeah, always looking for learning opportunities. Tiffany says inquiry-based learning supports the development of learning dispositions essential for school. So investigating, inquiring, all of those important areas. So developing again that love of learning. Beautiful. Some really good points there. So I've just got a quote here from Jones and Nemo. The children's ideas are an important source of the curriculum, but only one of many possible sources that reflect the complex ecology of their lives. And I would also add to that the lives of teachers as well. Okay. All right, so moving on. So the 3 interrelated elements of the early years learning framework, principles, practice, and learning outcomes are encompassed by those tenets: belonging, being, and becoming. So belonging, it acknowledges children's interdependence with others and the basis of relationships in defining identities. So relationships are central to a sense of belonging. And belonging is also central to being and becoming, in that it shapes to a degree who children are, and also, I guess, who they can become as well. It recognizes the significance of the here and now in children's lives. So I think it's about them knowing themselves, building and maintaining relationships with others, engaging in all of life's joys and complexities, and meeting challenges in everyday life. So with early childhood years being about the present, I think that's something, it's about the moment, not just preparation for the future. So becoming, as it says, it reflects the rapid and significant change that we are witness to in the early years. And it also emphasizes learning to participate fully and also actively in society as well. So I asked you to do the reading. It was the same reading as last week. I just wanted you to look at it in a different way. I wanted you to think about these tenets, what they actually look like in practice. And for some of you, what you think that it looks like in your own practice. Any thoughts in terms of your own practice? Those of you who are early childhood teachers, how can you see, and if we're looking at belonging, being, becoming on the slide there, how is that enacted in practice?
Sorry, belonging, like in school, belonging is I see it as the sense of pride to belong to that particular school, wearing your uniform with pride, behaving in the way that's acceptable, that's expected with the school rules, belonging to your class, whether it's 1T or KA or whatever it is, or blue group or whatever. I think it's so important for children to know that they have a safe space. And, kids are at school for 6-7 hours of the day, and they're only at home awake for less than that time most of the time. I think it's important for them to have a sense of belonging to their school and know that it's a safe space for them to be.
Yeah, excellent. That's a really good point. Thank you. Eunice says that what are the children bringing to the setting? It's about developing trust and confidence. Yeah, again, so it's similar, being part of something. Pamela, children feeling that they are an integral part of the community, somewhere where they can feel loved and appreciated. And Tiffany, being should respect the 4-year-old in the here and now, their right to learn through play and not just getting academically ready for school, which is what some schools expect. Yeah, a good point.
Oh, hi, Angela.
Yeah.
Here's Yifan. Yeah, and I have saw the document of the Australian curriculum. The second goal is mentioned that all the young Australians become confident and creative individuals, successful lifelong learners. And for the successful lifelong learners, I think that belong to the being, this part of it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'm really impressed about this successful lifelong learners, and I think it's very different from the Chinese curriculum. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of emphasis on, as 21st century learners, things are changing so much, and children really need to be critical reflectors. They need to, develop those entrepreneurial skills that, make, it's very different to what learning was like and what learning is valued. Things have changed a lot in Australia, and some people think it's gone too far as well. I think a lot of people would prefer less emphasis on critical reflection and developing those inquiry-based skills and more on their ABCs and numeracy and that sort of thing. So reading, writing and arithmetic.
Yeah, inquiring skills and creativities, these things maybe will link for the curriculum's settings in China.
Yeah. Interesting. Very good. So we've got Fiona saying belonging is difficult for children who take, all right, it's flashing through quickly, who take a long time to settle into the program. They are reluctant to join in. So how do they feel they belong? That's a good question. I think for me, Fiona, and I'm not sure if anyone agrees, this is where the early childhood teacher comes in. This is where those strong relationships, developing an understanding of the child and of the family and knowing how to encourage them to belong. In my day as a preschool teacher, we used to do home visits for children that were having difficulty settling in. I'd go and have lunch at their house, and I worked out at Kingston and there were lots of immigrant families, and some of the parents, English was their second language, and by going in and being part of their home and sharing a meal with them, it really made that connection and the children trusted a lot more. Yeah, I think that's perfectly appropriate today as well, to make that step. If there is a child that's struggling, for you to, to have that connection with home. Making choices about play and learning, building friendships, guided modeling. Belonging is about feeling known, accepted and valued. It's about being who they are. Teachers guide them to become a lifelong learner by teaching specific skills. Example, how to use certain tools, how to reflect, how to be observers. Excellent. Educators need to be ready for children, not the other way around. Educators need to be ready for children, not the other way around. Can you expand on that, Tiffany?
So what I mean is we often expect children to settle into our environment. And in fact, what we need to do is actually really get to know the family. And like you're saying, whether that means going to the visiting family or having a longer orientation period or doing phone calls to families, like we need to ready ourselves for the child and their needs rather than the child learning to adapt to what happens at our centres.
Very, very good point, Tiffany. Excellent. Warren's added just a bit of an add-on for the lifelong critical thinking approach, ABC News article that I found interesting. So if you wanted to have a look at that, thanks for sharing that, Warren. Okay, so I guess this is something in terms of unpacking the curriculum, the early years learning framework, what we've been discussing today. There's a lot of literature out there about that, one of which the reading that you had a look at this week and last week. So this is the sort of what you would be thinking about in terms of your assessment task and unpacking the documents. All right, now, not too much longer to go. I just wanted to talk about planning formats. I think Fleet and Patterson, they suggest that traditional style planning formats based on filling in the boxes, I guess, may constrain our emphasis on the individual child and the opportunity for inquiry-based learning or emergent learning. So this is outlined in two examples that we're going to have a look at. Have a look at the first one. So this one, it's an example. It emphasizes curriculum planning based on filling in the boxes. So with activities, no doubt based on the developmental capabilities of students, so fine and gross motor, cognitive, social and emotional. This was the way I planned when I graduated as an early childhood teacher. We had our format, our plan, and all of the different developmental areas, and this is what we planned too. Very little emphasis on individual children, you know, differentiating for individual children seemed to come in a lot later. Fiona remembers having to do box type planning. Yep, 2 weeks in advance. I think mine was a month in advance in somewhere where I worked. Yep, so the plan could be approved. So, you know, it was very much observation. We were, you know, you observed the children's development. You were expected to have a very good understanding of child development. Yeah. Angela's saying her first year of teaching, she had to submit planning a week in advance. Yeah. So it was about filling in the boxes and meeting curriculum and developmental requirements. So very, very minimal emphasis on, you know, individual child. I agree, Eunice, we have come a long way. And for me, you know, when was it? 1989? Oh, 1991. Yeah, so, you know, it's not that long ago. Actually, no. Oh, geez, it is quite a long time ago. Doesn't feel like it to me. Yeah, but we have come a long way. So, so this next one, it's more a focus on individual children's interests and current investigations. So with an emphasis on collaborating with families as well. What are your thoughts other than those that Helen's saying, isn't that still happening? I think in terms of being accredited in prior to school settings, I don't think you'd pass. I don't think you'd get, no, it's not, you have to have evidence that you're planning, that you're differentiating for individual students, that you're including families. You know, National Quality Framework and specifically the Early Years Learning Framework has really, you know, it has to be visible. It really does. And I think this is why it is quite difficult to get a really high grading for some organizations, because it's not something that you can, what was the term that you used, Warren, that not faking it? What was it that you said? The
fabrication.
Fabrication.
Oh,
yeah.
but I can't take credit for that. That's Stephen Bowles' terminology.
Yeah, but you know,
yeah.
It's not, you know, I could fabricate my plans back then. It was easy to fill in the boxes because you didn't actually have to, you know, plan for individual children, but you do need to now, and you need to really link those observations with individual students and to the Early Years Learning Framework outcomes. So, you know, what does you say? Most early childhood centres don't allow enough time for such collaboration. Individual planning happens, but very little team planning and collaboration. Yeah. I think more and more now, because Warren, it is linked to, you know, being accredited. I think they're having to, you know, they can't get away with it anymore.
Yeah, they can't. You're right. It's been accredited and assessed and ANI, etc. But doesn't mean it actually happens.
Yeah.
Again, a lot of
not all the time. Like maybe when someone's coming to assess.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Pull out all
again,
the punches.
The fabrication where it comes out.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. But this is ideal, isn't it? Eunice says, I have a section for intentional teaching and blank spaces for child-initiated play. Yeah, yeah. Our kindy has story park. Yep, very, very commonly used, and this does save a lot of time. A platform to communicate with families. Our planning is shared with the families online. Parents can comment on these documents, and we have a collaborative planning notebook at the entrance for parents to jot down ideas. So you'd have a portfolio of some point form as well. Kamiko, is that an online portfolio or is it a physical one? Both. Yeah, physical ones are good because the children can actually hold it and see and talk about and add things as well to it. I think that's great. And actually the portfolios was something that were introduced years after I started teaching as well. A board on the wall. Tiffany says, each child's current knowledge, strengths, ideas, cultural abilities and interests are the foundation of the program. 1.12. Excellent.
So that's the standard related to saying it absolutely has to be related.
Yeah. So we have, Eunice, you're right. We've come a long way. I think we should be really proud about that. Excellent. All right. Okay, moving on. I think I just wanted to note this, that I think it's important for us to see planning as multidimensional, and I think this is what we're all talking about here. So opening up different ways of thinking and working with children with that strong sense of collaboration. So moving away from formulas or prescriptive ways of planning. So, you know, use of idea webs and concept maps as a form of planning as well. I've seen that work really nicely in centres as well. So it doesn't have to be boxes. There's all different ways that you can do it. And Storypark, I think, and there are other platforms as well, but Storypark is a really good example of a way to do that. Okay, so I guess we also need to think about McArdle, Gibson and Zolo 2015, that it's in the QUT readings, talk about the speed and the pace of the day, as well as time slots organised within it, how it can affect how children feel in their learning environments. So, you know, children get frustrated when they're rushed, or they get bored when they're not sufficiently engaged, when there's so much focus on routine. So we need to consider things like visual, tactile, auditory resources that reflect the children's life experience and their understandings and interests as well. And, you know, lots of early years settings use experts or people from the community and parents as resources. So, you know, I know this centre that I went to have a look at the other day had a resident artist that came in once a fortnight and did artwork with the children. They had this beautiful mural that they'd constructed together. I think it was an Indigenous artist. So, you know, all of those sorts of things involving the community. You know, at some settings as well. I know there's one in a city that has an auntie that comes in, an Indigenous auntie that comes in and talks to children about, you know, stories and sharing narratives and things. So a really important part of the curriculum is the environment. So thinking about it from the learner's perspective, very importantly, how it's working for them and how they're represented in the environment. So putting ourselves in the learning spaces, lying on the ground and looking up as babies would do, looking at how the resources are set up. Are they child height? Are posters and children's artwork displayed at child level? I have to say, one of the things when I went into this environment, it was all very beautiful. There were lots of ceramic pots and things up on shelves where the children couldn't access them. So it was clearly, you know, they'd had an interior designer come in and design it to be aesthetically pleasing for the parents as well coming in. But, you know, I did note that the artwork and photos in the birth to two of all of the families and the children were displayed at child level as well. So, you know, all those sorts of things. Yeah, so I think spaces need to be inviting and they need to encourage inquiry. And I think, you know, when you walk into a learning space, I think it actually says a lot about how early childhood educators value and view the children as well as being capable and competent. So, you know, it says when you see an environment, it really does say a lot about how the educators feel. So the reference is in at the slides at the end if you wanted to have a look more in detail about that. All right, so I guess all of these things that we've been thinking about, we've got a challenge, I guess, in a lot of ways, and it's to be fully understanding of the curriculum content while teaching intentionally and purposefully with the interests, the needs, and strengths of children central to all our decision making. So if we think about that in terms of, you know, meaningful learning experiences for those individual children, then I think, you know, we can meet that challenge to a certain extent. All right. Now we've been doing this for quite a lot, and I'm not actually going to do this slide because we've been doing it all the way along. We've really been thinking about the readings and what it means for your current understandings. And a lot of you have shared your particular experiences. I guess, is there anything that anyone wants to add in terms of those points? I guess what's making you feel uncomfortable or what excites you about the readings and what we've been talking about, or what worries you or disturbs you. I know one of the big factors that Warren has brought up that I do agree with him, but I have hope for the future is financial and time constraints on being able to implement a lot of these wonderful ideas. But I think, especially in terms of emergent curriculum, it's about, you know, being with the children, getting down to their level, letting them do a lot of the planning. So in terms of an emergent curriculum, very much planning with idea webs, you know, getting down and posing open-ended questions to the children. I'm going to talk about this in the next week, but, you know, really getting them to be central to that planning, and it is doable. And especially with things like Story Park as well, it does help with time. Floor books. What's a floor book?
So floor books are something that quite a lot of centres seem to be using in terms of children asking questions about something and then recording their findings.
Okay.
Yeah. So they might be called something different. And the name of the person who sort of started it is escaping me at the moment, but she comes from out of the UK, Claire somebody. I'll think of it for later. Sorry.
And I'm sure you can Google it too. So
Yeah.
if you wanted to find out more information about floor books, because I am certainly going to do it, because I use idea webs, but, you know, which, you know, graphic organizers, which I'm sure it's probably very similar.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. Well, what we used to do is use a big, large A3 flip note sketchbook you could get, and use your colors and whatnot, and you sit down with the children at carpet time and make your yarn circle, whatever you want to call it, and throw ideas down, write it up, and that's your emerging curriculum. And then what educators used to do is put that floor book up on display for the parents to come in and go, well, this is the discussion we've had today, and these are our lessons, and then link it through Story Park or other applications. So that's kind of as it got started.
Excellent. Very good. All right. So Claire Warden, there you go. Floor books. Has everyone got that? C-L-A-R-E, Warden, W-A-R-D-E-N, for those listening at home to the recording. All right. Going to do a quick run through of assessment tasks, just making sure that everyone's up to speed. On the task sheet, you've been provided with a clear essay structure with an allocation of words for each section. And on Blackboard, there's an example of what an outline might look like using the image of the child as an example, which you've got up on the screen there. And I suggested, you know, a lot of you have got your research question down pat and you've started to look at your research. So I think it's good at this point to possibly get down a loose structure so you can start thinking about that word allocation and where you're actually going. Some of you might like to start with some headings in those particular areas as well to help you break it down. Also this week, it's a good week to start if you haven't done so. I've noticed that there are some people have shared their questions and their focuses on the Padlet, but if you'd like to do that now, especially those external students, I think that's a really good idea to share that. Sorry, just reading the Padlet. Current knowledge of early childhood settings and practices is still limited. Oh, okay, Helen. Okay. And on a slight tangent, one of my real concerns is that there are many teachers in schools where I work who are headed towards retirement in the next 5 years or so. Are we sufficiently prepared for the loss of that experience? I believe we are. I hope so. We're trying to get, I have my 750 first years are very keen to get out there and get jobs. So as teachers, and they're all extremely enthusiastic as well. A lot of them are secondary. We're having fewer and fewer early childhood teachers. Is that what you mean, Pamela, early childhood teachers? We never seem to be prepared for the drain of teachers. Yeah, no, I do agree, but there are more and more teachers out there. I think, you know, with the fees for education, study fees are a lot less than others, for example, arts degrees and things. And I think the government is trying to encourage people to go out there and study in areas where they're going to get jobs. So let's hope that we are prepared, Pamela. Yes. All right. Sorry, we got distracted. Easy to do. Yeah, so looking at that particular structure, I really think that you should all be at that stage now where you're starting to really get it down on paper and think about headings and, you know, continue with your reading and sourcing the literature that you're going to review. So the scholarly literature, empirical journal articles, so peer reviewed, fairly current. So I wouldn't be looking anything that was more than 10 years, especially if it, you know, not seminal. So if you're looking at foundational research and literature, that's fine. It would be much older than that. But I would definitely be thinking about getting a draft structure. Has anyone got a draft structure already? Anyone at that point? Not yet? Okay, I just have to say there's one last comment. This is the last comment. As long as early childhood teachers and early childhood educators are seen as glorified babysitters with little social acknowledgement, despite the COVID crisis, there might be limited people entering the field. Yes, very good point. Very, very good point. Cameron says that he has a rationale and intro done. Well done. Well done. think there's some jealous people out there. Cameron, are you happy to share your focus and your research question? You don't have to if you don't want to. Okay. So, transitions into prep, excellent. Warren's got ED and 604 to finish first. Now on to EUN 660 and then LCN 600, excellent. Well, you do know that, you know, all of that literature that you're sourcing and everything from 604, you can use a lot of it in 660. I'm sure you're going to do that, Warren, aren't you? Good, yeah. All right, so 400 words have been allocated for your literature review. So it needs to be clear and very concise. So the purpose of your literature review is to determine the research written around your topic and identify those key areas of importance that you will then break down further on. So you could divide your literature review into subheadings if you wanted to do that. I do like subheadings. I think it helps you to really identify those key ideas. So all of your discussion in your essay will be around the reviewed literature. So any literature that you discuss in the rest of the essay needs to be introduced first in your literature review. That's really important. So you wouldn't be introducing new literature in your conclusion. Everything has to be introduced in that literature review that you're going to unpack or discuss. So on Blackboard, I put a little link in there to some really good information. It's just basic information about structuring your literature review. I think, yes, I have got that here. So I won't introduce that yet, but the first thing you need to do is determine your purpose. So work out what you need to address in the literature review. So what are you searching the literature to discover? What keywords will you use in your searches? And I'm sure, as I've advised, you will, those of you that aren't confident with searching the databases, you're going to make an appointment with HighQ, whether it's via Zoom or face-to-face if you're in Brisbane, to make an appointment with HighQ to assist you with your searching. I actually went up to my office just around the corner from the library and I said, I've been telling all of my students to come in and see you or to make a Zoom session with someone about their data searching. They said, yep, if they contact me, I'll give them a link and this is where they would go and organize an appointment to actually give some advice on how to really do your data searching quickly and efficiently. So what kind of literature? So you need to select appropriate source material. So you would be using a variety of academic and scholarly sources that are relevant, current and authoritative. So they're peer reviewed within the last 10 years. Depending on the topic as well. So for example, if you were looking into ICT, I would start with like 5 years because there is a lot of recent research out there. So you would be looking at books, journal articles, reports, government documents. You would not be sourcing websites. You would, the library is the best place to search for your sources. So through the databases, you can use resources from our QUT readings, anything that we've been discussing in lectures. I've got some references at the end of the workshops. So you're welcome to have a look at those and source those. Reading the literature, so critically read each source, look for the arguments presented rather than for facts. Oh, well, that's important as well, but you're looking at the arguments. Take notes as you read and start to organize your review around themes and ideas. So that's how you're going to get those key areas, the headings. You're looking for themes and ideas. Consider using a table or some sort of graphic organizer. I use concept maps to identify how the different sources relate to each other. So a concept map, or some people like Venn diagrams, just to see how particular areas link. And always when you're taking notes, make sure you paraphrase. Don't cut and paste to get yourself into trouble. Always paraphrase when you're taking notes, then you won't have the issue with plagiarism. All right, so I've got analysing the literature that you've found. So in order for your writing to reflect really strong critical analysis, you need to evaluate your sources. So not every source, but those ones that are really that you have focused on a lot. So you'd be looking at the key terms and concepts. How relevant is the article to your specific topic? What are the major relationships, the trends, the patterns in the article? Has the author structured the arguments? How authoritative and credible is the source? So you'd be looking at the methodology. That's important. So in some of those articles that you review, I would like you to be unpacking the methodology. Again, not in all of them, you've only got 400 words, but at least one, you know, a really important one, unpack the methodology and the participants. I think that's important. What are the differences and the similarities between each of the sources? And very importantly, which is going to be a focus of that final part, the gaps in the literature. So when you're looking at the implications, you would be thinking about gaps in the literature. So that implications section is really important, because this is where you're going to discuss the implications of your analysis for teachers, children and families, and link it to your specific practice. So this statement is going to be the basis of your next assignment. So when you talk about an action plan and how you're going to put things into practice, and what professional development you would do if you wanted to implement, you know, your particular focus, or you want to be a change agent and change your practices, you know, in your learning environment or in your whole context. So there are 600 words allocated for this. So this is really important. How is to the implications, what impact are they going to have on your practice? Very important. So 600 words. Warren says, if you email the librarians, they are so helpful, pointed me in the right directions and uncovered a few sources that I would never have thought of. Yeah, I keep on telling you, I've said this over and over and over again, like a cracked record. Contact the library. That's what you pay your fees for. It's a big part, and they love it. They love helping people. You know, you take your research question, tell them what it is. As Warren said, they can help you. Okay, back to where we were. So analysing the literature. I've got this slide here because it's a really important part, and it's the area that if you aren't experienced or it's been a while, that some students do have difficulty with. And I've got here on our criteria sheet, because this is where you're going to be looking as well, you can see where the first two criteria refer to your ability to source quality literature to influence your understandings. So that theoretical underpinnings, very important. Any questions at this point? As you can see, I have added this in. I think it was in last week as well. I'm pretty sure I had it in last week. Just in terms of contacting QUT if you do want to organise a session. And when I went to talk to the librarians, they had a list of lots of workshops that are happening as well. So that will be, you know, a lot of Zoom sessions and things that you can log into to help you with your academic writing and referencing. Okay, so we have got at the end of the lectures, I generally have all of the sources that I've used as well. So some of them are in QUT readings, but I guess there are others as well that I've sourced to assist me in formulating content for the lectures as well. Early Childhood Australia is also a good source to get research from. Are any of you members of Early Childhood Australia? Yeah, I am as well. So if you're a member, you can access all of the research there. Some of it, I think you do have to pay for, but all of the magazines and things are based on research. So you will be able to access at the end of the magazines, well, they have like little newsletters. They have a list of the references. So some of you might want to access that as well. Just have a search and see if there's anything relevant to your particular topic. You could be also referencing the ethical documents, the Australian professional standards, are some documents that you might consider unpacking and referencing as well. All right, so we've gone through a lot. It's recorded, so if there is something, excuse me, that you wanted to go back and have a look at, or some particular discussion that we had that you thought was relevant, you can always go back and have a look at the recording. Any questions before we finish up? Natalie, you look busy. Yeah. What time is it there, Natalie?
12:30, so like midday.
Midday, excellent. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Excellent. All right, anything else? No? So keep emailing me those, you know, refined research questions. I'm happy to give you some feedback or some assistance. Yeah, have you got a fly or something in there, Warren? All right, so I'm going to turn the recording off. So thank you to those who are listening to the recording. Hopefully we'll see you in Zoom land in the coming weeks. Thank you.